This week I'm thinking about weapons of mass distraction. I get increasingly preoccupied with the idea that we're confronted in the form of our so-called leaders with really rather inept stage magicians who need us to be looking the other way while they do whatever they need to do, fumble a white dove from an inside pocket or pull a card out of their sleeve. They need the audience to be looking at the other hand while they get on with the tricky magical business. And I just feel increasingly that all we're being offered all the time is clumsy distraction. I don't think the distractions are just happening here. Not by any stretch. I mean, when I talk about the West, I'm talking about the Western world, capital W, capital D. There's a lot of W and D there, isn't there? Weapons of mass destruction. But the West, by which I mean Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand, all of the countries in the world that are supposed to be liberal democracies, you can see the same thing going on. So people are being distracted in Australia. People are being distracted in North America. It's all part of the same bigger process. And the last few days of where we were all invited to be preoccupied with Gary Lineker and Match of the Day, I'm not invested in football. And so I watched the whole Gary Lineker Match of the Day scenario unfold with some vague fascination, actually, because I didn't know who most of the people were. That said, you think, on the one hand, we're invited to be terribly worried about climate crisis, war in Ukraine, net zero and Agenda 2030, but also readily things of apparent importance can fall out of the news schedule like a piano dropping out of a window, and we suddenly don't need to be updated for a week or more, and instead we get invited to contemplate whether a multi-millionaire ex-footballer is or isn't going to present a BBC sports roundup on a Saturday evening. It's bizarre. Either we're in a state of preparing for nuclear war with Russia, or we're not. And you think, if we are, is it really advisable to set that news aside for all these days while we worry about Match of the Day? As I say, it just begins to look increasingly clumsy to me. And I wonder how many times we will watch this sequence of events without asking serious questions, or without enough of us asking the kind of serious questions that might actually provoke a change. I cast my mind back to my own relative youth and all the way back to 2003 and the weapons of mass destruction that we were assured that Saddam Hussein had ready in Iraq. This is 2003. This was in the run-up to what became the Second Gulf War. And we were told that Saddam Hussein could launch chemical attacks on Europe at 45 minutes' notice. Subsequently, it turned out that the September dossier, as it was known, or as it became known in the mainstream media, the Sexed Up dossier, which made those allegations, was subsequently shown to have been, well, based on exaggeration, to put it mildly. And then there was that tragic story of the MOD official, Dr. David Kelly, who committed suicide in the run-up to all of that. And I was distracted. It certainly worked on me. I was distracted and thought, really? 45 minutes? Weapons of mass destruction? Are we really facing some kind of bioweapons threat from Saddam Hussein? I was certainly swept along by it all. And then you have to wonder, I wonder 20, 30 years late in the day, is the capitalist system just predicated on war? I think that's the question that's just going round and round in my head at the moment, because there's no denying that we just go from one to another. And we have really all of my adult life. First Gulf War, Second Gulf War, 9/11, Afghanistan, Biden just pulled out of so disastrously, war in Ukraine, and just as they keep coming along like buses, they don't always have the necessary shelf life. It feels like the war in Ukraine might be running out of steam somehow, that they're not selling it so effectively any longer. And what are we hearing about? We're being invited to contemplate war with China. we're given to understand that America might be prepared to go toe-to-toe, head-to-head with China about Taiwan and all of the rest of it. It's madness. But is it confected, curated, distracting madness that's just supposed to keep us in this perpetual state of anxiety? Because, war's good for business. In amongst all the killing, the usual suspects make another kind of killing every time. There hasn't been a war in the last 100 years without enormous profits for some small clique within the military-industrial complex. You've got to wonder. You've just got to wonder. And as I say, China, just mentioned China. Whatever you think of China and whatever you think of Xi Jinping, China has just brokered a peace deal between Shia Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia that is not being widely circulated by the mainstream media in the West. Now, I'm not... Make what you will of Xi Jinping and the regime of the Chinese Communist Party, but a deal has been brokered between Shia Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia. That is newsworthy. That is new, and the consequences of that brokered peace deal. Well, we'll just have to wait and see. But that could be the shifting of tectonic plates in that part of the world. Who knows? When did the West last attempt to broker peace anywhere? I think that's a legitimate question to ask. We don't. We get involved in war, but when was the last time you had anybody at Camp David contemplating significant peace deals? It just doesn't happen anymore, if it ever did. And what's the other thing that we've learned recently in the last 2-3 years? Follow the money. We've all got to ask questions about that, because somehow it's always about money. The last 2 or 3 years it's been about money in big pharma, money in big agriculture, money for the military-industrial complex. It's all about money. In the last 3 years we've seen the biggest transfer of wealth from poor to billionaire in history. You can't overlook that. We must not set that aside. And so then I start asking myself, is war the only thing that the West has to keep the insanity born of fractional reserve banking on the rails? What else have we got going on at the moment? We've got the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank. It's been sorted somehow or other in the US, and it's not being described officially as a bailout. And then the UK European wing of it, the Silicon Valley Bank, has been saved by being purchased or acquired somehow by HSBC, and we're being promised that not a penny of taxpayers' money is involved. Now, I don't know. I look on at that, and my instinct is, if Jeremy Hunt can appear on the television smiling and say the problem's solved, there's nothing more to see here, and no taxpayers' money was used, then I just begin to suspect that quite the reverse must be the truth. But yeah, fractional reserve banking. If you haven't latched onto that one yet, it's this idea. It's the great money trick, whereby for longer than anyone can remember now, private banks are empowered to create money out of thin air. It's the only thing that's made from nothing. God created the universe and everything that surrounds it. That is the work of God, creating things out of nothing. The only other thing that is created that's something out of nothing is money, created by private profit-based banks. They're the only people that can do that. If you or I tried to do it, we would be put in jail for fraud. But private banks get to create money from nothing. And having created that money from nothing, they get to lend it. And they don't just lend... If they create £100, they don't just lend £100 once to one person. They lend the same £100 that didn't exist until they said it did, over and over and over again. That's fractional reserve banking. As I say, if any of us tried to get involved in such a scheme, that would be a Ponzi scheme, and we would end up in jail. But no, not the banks. The Bank of England has been operating like that for hundreds of years. The Fed, the Federal Reserve in the United States, in 1913, around Christmas time, when everybody was on holiday, the Fed was transformed into a private profit-based entity, empowered to lend non-existent money over and over and over again. So let's just be mindful of the madness of fractional reserve banking and contemplate what extremes up to and including war might be required on a circular basis to keep the wheels on the wagon. That's the reality of capitalism in the West. Privatised capitalist entities use money to make money. The money that they create, they also, they take in deposits, obviously. They take in money from you and me and business, and for which they offer negligible interest. But they then push that money out as well, but demand high interest rates for it in return. So there's another. The whole thing is just a scam, a fraudulent scam. And you get into situations, as we did with the Silicon Valley Bank last week, that what happens if a set of circumstances unfolds that the depositors want their money back? And because the banks have lent it tenfold, 20-fold, whatever, they are never in a position to give the depositors their money back. It's literally impossible. There's not enough money in circulation to pay back the debt in either direction. So what happens if depositors go to the bank and say, I want my money that I deposited with you? They can't give it. So that's what happened last week. The Silicon Valley Bank had been in the business of lending money to the government, and they do that by investing in government loans and government bonds and so on and so on. And it all goes okay until it isn't going okay, and when it starts to not be okay, you get what we got last week. So Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. And the question is, how bad will this situation get? You've got Jeremy Hunt out there saying everything's okay, nothing more to see here. But is it really? Is it really? I think you can hear the distant rumble of trouble. And you begin also, another question you ask is, eventually does that entire system come tumbling down once and for all? So I was thinking, we covered it on GB News a couple of weeks ago when it happened. We covered the story of the East Palestine, Ohio train crash that put the poisonous cloud into the atmosphere on such a scale that it could be seen from space. And I wonder, I think about that and I think, did we see in East Palestine a metaphor? Sometimes you think the universe itself is trying to tell you something. I thought, was this a message from the universe? Because that happened because a private rail company had been cutting corners when it came to safety. That's why the train literally came off the tracks. It was supposed to be being regulated by the US government. The US government is the regulator for that safety. But because the US government is captured, the regulator is captured by the private for-profit company, you get what happened in East Palestine. The company was cutting corners to prioritise profit, which is profit means more to the company than safety. The captured government regulator was not in a position properly to regulate the company, and so you get what happened in East Palestine, Ohio. The train came off the tracks. Was that a canary in the coal mine? The community of East Palestine's wrecked, destroyed. So is that a little microcosm for what we can expect to happen when the big train comes off the big tracks? Is that the universe literally trying to tell us something? All I'm saying is, how big is a situation like this possibly going to get? Joe Biden in the States is saying that the US economy is still going in the right direction. And we hear the same mood music from Jeremy Hunt and the rest here. Here's the question: is this why we go from one war to the next? Has capitalism in the West got to the point where it's only a repeating cycle of war that keeps the train on the tracks, that keeps the wheels on the wagon? Is that where we are? And the crash in East Palestine, are we finally headed for the big crash? Are the Western world's economies about to come off the rails once and for all? Because sooner or later, it's going to be that big crash that finally sorts all of this out. It'll have catastrophic financial consequences, but it has to come And are we seeing it now? Is the big crash coming down the tracks?